with you, and a warm welcome to you, as always, from all of us here at Powerscourt with Kilbride. Today is Advent Sunday, the first Sunday of Advent, the 28th of November. And today we light the first of our candles in the Advent wreath in all of our churches. But here in this square, we begin a short series of reflections about the unsung heroes, those Christmas characters that we hear about or don't hear about in many cases. Today we begin with the story of Zechariah, the father to John the Baptist. But first, we take a moment now to draw breath wherever we may be, to acknowledge that we stand or sit in the presence of God this day, that He is with us now as we come together, even virtually, to worship Him. We bring to God now anything that lies on our hearts, the things that keep us from Him, the things that block us from going forward. We ask for His forgiveness, for His healing if needed, for His guidance and blessing going forward from this moment into the rest of our lives.
The angel Gabriel appears to Zechariah. When Herod was king of Judea, there was a priest named Zechariah, who belonged to the division of priests named after Abijah. Zechariah's wife Elizabeth was a descendant of Aaron. Zechariah and Elizabeth had God's approval. They followed all the Lord's commandments, regulations perfectly. Yet they never had any children because Elizabeth couldn't become pregnant. Both of them were too old to have children. Zechariah was on duty with his division of priests. As he served in God's presence, he was chosen by priestly custom to go into the Lord's temple to burn incense. All the people were praying outside while he was burning incense. Then to the right of the incense altar, an angel of the Lord appeared to him. Zechariah was troubled and overcome with fear. The angel said to him, "Don't be afraid, Zechariah. God has heard your prayer. Your wife Elizabeth will have a son, and you will name him John. He will be your pride and joy, and many people will be glad that he was born. As far as the Lord is concerned, he will be a great man. He will never drink wine or any other liquor. He will be filled with the Holy Spirit even before he is born. He will bring many people in Israel back to the Lord their God. He will go ahead of the Lord with the spirit and power that Elijah had. He will change parents' attitudes towards their children. He will change disobedient people so that they will accept the wisdom of those who have God's approval. In this way he will prepare the people for their Lord." Zechariah said to the angel, "What proof is this for any of this? I'm an old man, and my wife is beyond her childbearing years." The angel answered him, "I'm Gabriel. I stand in God's presence. God sent me to tell you this good news. But because you didn't believe what I said, you will be unable to talk until the day this happens. Everything will come true at the right time." Meanwhile, the people were waiting for Zechariah. They were amazed he was staying in the temple so long. When he did come out, he was unable to speak to them, so they realized that he had seen a vision in the temple. He mentioned to them, but remained unable to talk. When the days of his service were over, he went home. Later his wife Elizabeth became pregnant and didn't go out in public for 5 months. She said, "The Lord has done this for me now. He has removed my public disgrace."
Zechariah sat at the very centre of his life, the centre of his home, the centre of his kitchen, at the centre of a crowd of people who were concerned about him. "What happened?" he heard somebody ask. But this would never do. He could not respond. He merely sat there with his mouth open and uselessly moving like a fish on a riverbank. This certainly would not do for a priest from the household of Levi. And yet he could not speak. When the house was silenced later, he would write down all that he had seen and heard, but for now, all that he could do was sit with his poor heart beating against its chest almost as fast as it had done an hour or so before. What had happened? Don't be afraid. He had encountered the divine just outside the curtain to the holiest of holies. God had hit him left field, out of the blue, in the form of a creature the likes of which, that even had he the words, he would not be able to properly describe, and a voice that seemed to be coming from all places at once, even from within himself. Do not be afraid. That in itself was too difficult a task. One thing that he could still do was move, however tentatively. He rose and made his way to the open doorway and paused for a moment to draw a deep breath of warm evening air. How could he have been so foolish? Foolish enough to question the divine, this prayer that he had been offering up to heaven for years after years was to be answered. He was to be blessed by a son, even in his old age, and with his wife Elizabeth far past childbearing years. But how could he have been so foolish as to think with his human brain, his rational mind, and to question the divine? This son he was to have was to be called John, and he was to be great, and he was to call people back. He was to urge them to change their minds, to begin again. He was to cleanse them with water. But above all other things, he would ask for very little, and yet he would know at a glimpse the face of God in human form, and have the courage to proclaim this to all who would listen. As we think of Zechariah today, we think of a man who had waited his whole life for this type of an encounter with the divine. He had not given up praying or serving. How often do we serve God in the ways that we think are acceptable to him, and how often does he reach out of all that is formal and religious and talk to us directly, or task us perhaps with something? And how often do we respond with complete trust? Because you see, it's our doubt that will silence us, and our hesitation perhaps to believe that will render us mute when it comes to declaring him. Zechariah was an elderly man, a devoted priest, and highly thought of. He had served God to the best of his abilities, and yet, in the latter part of his life, something profound had happened. And this man was chosen by God to be the first person, through the angel Gabriel, that God would reveal his plans to. The plans to come to earth in human form. Before the nativity even began, Zechariah was the first person to know this.